So immediately on my left is Dame Dawn Childs, and I will ask you to introduce yourself a little bit and introduce the company that you work for. She's the CEO of Pure DC.
Yeah, thank you. So Pure Data Centers is a global data center company that builds and operates data centers for hyperscale customers, so Microsoft, Google, Amazon, or the large-scale tech companies. From a global perspective, we have data centers live here in the UK in London, Dublin, over in Asia, in Indonesia, and also we're going to go live shortly in Abu Dhabi, so hence the GCC focus for us. We also have, as one of our key strategic priorities, further expansion in both Europe and particularly the GCC.
All right. Milan Radia.
Yeah, Milan Radia. I've been involved in data centers since '99, actually, initially from an investment banking perspective. I then went to work for Interaction Digital Realty in 2017, responsible primarily for the African rollout, where we seeded Icolo in Kenya, acquired Medallion in Nigeria. Along the way, I moved to Dubai and then ended up working for Damac, running parts of their data center business. And then last year, a group of us set up Connected Compute, which is a business that works with data center operators, governments, helping them roll out data centers. So we're working on projects in West Africa, France, and Saudi at the moment.
Thank you. And Tim Botry. Tim, you also have been around the data centers for a while.
Yeah, a little while, probably a year before yourself. 98, I was one of the co-founders of Global Switch down in the Docklands, or London Switch as it was in those days. And through my career, I ended up working in the Nordics, building my first foray into hyperscale data centers for a company up there. And then 5 years ago, I founded Quantum Switch, not too far from my roots, and we focused on initially the Middle East, and now we've got 4 data centers live in Qatar and in Saudi Arabia, and we're focusing on competing with Dawn for a not too distant future in some more local markets, and we have some projects in North America and also Europe just coming on stream as well. So yeah, an element of live and development.
Fantastic. Let me stay with you, Tim. So a simple question, and I would ask the same to Milan and to Dawn as well, is why the GCC? Why now?
I think there's always a lag, in markets. We've seen it. The trends come from North America out, and I think the GCC has very much got a vision away from fossil fuels, and what is the new oil. Data is a very big part of that, and the GPU revolution I think is fueling that on a major scale, and like with many competitive nations, they want to be the biggest and the best at it. So we're seeing a lot of activity, not just with training, but also AI training, but also with inference workloads and standard cloud environments, enterprise. So there's a lot of. I mean, Saudi Arabia has the. I think it's like 70% of the population is under 35, and so they have a very tech savvy nation. They're a very tech savvy nation, and so there's a lot of. It'd be quite rare not to see a Saudi without at least two elements of technology, one in each hand, and using it constantly. So it's a growing opportunity for all of us.
All right. Milan?
Yeah, so I think UAE's really set the pace for the region. The way that the country has developed over the last 10 to 15 years has surprised its neighbours. And even Abu Dhabi, within kind of UAE, jumped on the bandwagon with Dubai. And the change in effective leadership in Saudi has prompted a whole new era, I think, for them. So Vision 2030 is incredibly far-reaching and powerful. And I think what we see is that there's been an initiative to really keep a lot of the value domestically. So just to give you an example, outdoor advertising. JCDecaux were dominant in the airports and some of the outdoor advertising. That's been migrated to Al Arabiya, which is a domestic company which is able to do the same thing effectively, having learnt from what JCDecaux has done. And you're seeing the same thing. Now, where they need to, they'll work with international companies. So clearly they can't develop their own cloud platforms on par with Microsoft, AWS, and Google. So they facilitated that. So I think you've got that kind of general energy and impetus that's driving immense investment, and talent is being sucked in. So you'll all know many people in our industries that are being sucked into Saudi, the UAE, and from UAE into Saudi now. There's been a bit of a talent drain from elsewhere. Taxation's clearly a benefit there and so on. What I would say lastly is that the regulatory dynamic is quite favorable. So when you look at some of the observations you made about the deployment of cloud regions, they followed, first of all, the creation of credible, properly governed internet exchanges, and then transit zones. So they, until the transit zones, and then that gives access to proper, affordable dark fiber tariffs. Without those kind of elements alongside all these other wonderful trends, I think a lot of those cloud regions wouldn't have been deployed to the extent that they have.
And difficult to add anything to the very comprehensive answers you've had already, but I think there's a sort of an extra dimensional dynamic, which is as other markets are closing up and power's becoming very difficult to get, costs are rising, those markets are declining, and where there's the appetite and the political will, cheap access to power, that very large solar farm that you talked about, then it sort of entices companies in, so that they want to win the AI race, they want to be at the forefront, so they want to help the tech companies to come to them, and if there are any workloads that are agnostic, so significant AI-heavy workloads, then why wouldn't they try and incentivize them to get them in region? And with that, they're pulling in the talent, as Milan just said, all of the people who would have been building and sorting out data centers in the sort of FLAP-D region, as that's closing down, it's all moving across over there. So they're opening their arms. They have the desire. They have the political backing, cheap power. So people are going to go across there. So it's both opportunity and desire. I think it's all there for the taking.
Stars are aligned. Yeah. If I may stay with you, Don. Pure DC is well-established platform. Are there any lessons learned, going into a new virgin market like the GCC from more mature markets, like in your case, Europe, Western Europe?
Very much so. So in any new regions, I think who you choose to align with and partner with is very important, because anyone thinking, coming from either from Europe or from any other jurisdictions, thinking they could just come in and sort it all out on their own, it's never going to happen. So picking key partnerships to help you to navigate the region, understand the regulatory frameworks, and also understand who are the best players to do business within region is critically important. And we found that not just in the GCC region, but in Asia as well, and even in some parts of Europe. So wherever you're going that's new, then embrace partnerships and work really closely. And also be very, very conscious of any planning, consenting challenges, any government regulations that you need to be the right side of and have the right conversations early enough. Otherwise, if you fall foul of any of those elements, then it's very difficult to recover that and to be seen as a trusted partner afterwards.
But the way are you seeing your customers, the hyperscalers, do you see their architecture evolving any way differently, for example, from a connectivity point of view in a new region now? With lessons learned, but for example, a region that I know very well, Asia, it started with Sydney was the most important hub for the hyperscalers for all of Asia Pac, and then it's Singapore, Hong Kong, Tokyo, and now into every country. Are you seeing some lessons here?
And so I think some of the ease of navigation plays out for the hyperscalers as well. So they forward plot their demand requirements, and they target certain regions to break into, and also think about the organic growth in other regions. And if they have challenges in expanding in a particular region they want to, then they will pivot. So they might have, I don't know, say for example, earmarked some further expansion in Asia because there's an awful lot of cloud adoption to still go, or they want to do some AI workloads there. But then if they find that it's too challenging from either power, planning, or getting the right partnerships in place, then they will pivot and move their focus elsewhere. So I have seen some sort of encouraging demand requirements from them in certain regions, which then fall away pretty quickly. So that's sort of something that we've seen along the way, where you have to make sure you move in step with them to explore new regions rather than going out on a limb because they've asked and then saying, here, I've got this thing you've asked for. Oh, no, I don't need it anymore. So we work very much with them in new regions, and they say their demands will spike and then fall away pretty quickly, and they pivot and they reanalyze their forecasts very rapidly, at least on an annual basis, if not far more quickly. So we have to move with them.
Tim, would love to hear from you on that topic.
Yeah, I think there's also been a big push towards the sovereign data, and that's driving a lot of capacity, both traditional storage, processing workloads, GPUs, the whole work. So I think as the AI world unfolds, we're seeing a different setup of particularly around sovereign data. There's a lot of talk from NVIDIA about creating sovereign AI environments. In terms of, Daunt's right. The hyperscalers pivot on I call it the Vegas. Every month they pull the slot machine and they decide where they're going to go next, and it's and you have to pivot and you have to be nimble to be able to adapt to those. And you also have to keep the confidence that you can turn around and deliver on these in some very challenging environments, both regulatory. Power is the big one. Everybody always says power, but there's also going to a power company in Qatar or in Saudi, they don't understand why you need two connections for the same amount of power. And why aren't you using it all? Well, because it's a backup, and you have to go through a whole educational process, and the educational process has been probably the largest challenge in going into new markets, whether that's in the Middle East or into APAC or into some of the Eastern European positions. Everybody wants data centers, but when they look into it further, it's like, okay, well, that's not quite what we expected. We just thought we were going to sell you tons of power, and so there's a massive educational progress.
To your point, I remember 7-8 years ago in Riyadh, myself going and visiting a Tier 4 data center. I think it's the only Tier 4 data centers I've ever seen anywhere, because all of us in the industry, we know it's the extra benefit that you get from it. It comes at extreme cost, but they were willing to go for that. Milan.
Yeah, so I think there's a few issues the hyperscalers still have to circumvent. So if you ask them, what's top of your wish list for these markets, they're going to say connectivity. You can't just build and then find that you're going to get the right diversity of connectivity. So straight away, you're going to negotiate with the government. So you've seen pretty much in every case in the GCC markets, the hyperscalers have gone in via the government. They've agreed some sort of deployment involving skilling, digital transformation. Some of these are new, like Google's discussions with Kuwait, are new. They haven't, relatively, but they've been unable to find any ways to actually go live. But the hyperscalers have understood that there's no access to dark fiber without the government say so through their nationalized telcos. You look at the UAE, special provisions have been made for the hyperscalers, which are not fully embedded into, the regulatory structure to allow them to get access to dark fiber. And the same thing's happening in Saudi. So there's no independence here. The relationships have to be intertwined with the policymakers, the decision makers. And at the same time, what you're finding, a lot of the data center operators are not executing in the way that the hyperscalers would like. So there have been a lot of delays. Projects have been 12 months, 18 months late, even where they've ordered prefabs. If you look at Doha, even the prefab project was pretty late and way over budget, which I think surprised people. So, they're kind of saying, hang on a minute, I'm not kind of happy with what I've seen, and they're kind of also pausing for breath a little bit. And, that Doha example is a good one. Microsoft went into the Ooredoo site, 6 megawatts. They did so on the condition that within a certain period of time, Ooredoo would not be the primary connectivity provider to their own campus, which they agreed to.
So Milan, if I stay with you, if you can put both your hat of a previous company before where you were representing them, as well as your current hat now of advising others and so forth, what can you tell us about the various countries of the GCC specifically? Different workloads, for example, or focus?
Sure. So I think, look, the UAE is clearly the most advanced in terms of workloads. I think that's clear. G42 has an advantage. I was on another panel a couple of days ago with one of the senior guys at Kasna, and he made the point, actually, they're seeing disproportionate AI demand today because of their Casna G42 relationship, because G42 is right at the heart of some of the chip designs and fabrication and so on. So that gives them a different set of credentials with which to go and play in the AI picture, right?
And they've been doing this for much longer than Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, some of those Arabic LLMs and so on that are now trying to attract investment are going in there. And that G42 deal, which you highlighted in Kenya, is about, it's actually Swahili plus some Arabic LLMs they're going to deploy. Why? Because it's geothermal power. There's 1 gigawatt coming online. They're starting with 100 megawatts, but that'll scale. But you're looking at less than $10 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's a perfect, and quite a cold environment where that is. So you're looking at a perfect environment for these type of models. So that's kind of, so UAE is quite unique. They've got the transit zone, data media is very well established. You've got very high traffic. Bahrain is another transit market. So they've got the Batelco transit zone. You have a very high density of connectivity, and they're the second highest throughput of IP traffic in the region. So Bahrain punches well above its weight. And if Henry's in the room, he's not, but he knows that very well living there. So Saudi's coming upstream. They've got the transit zones. They're trying to attract, but the reality is there isn't much going, right now there isn't much within those various deployments you've talked about. It's early stage in terms of those cloud regions. A lot of them were announced only in 23, so they haven't even been deployed yet, right? And a lot of them are still looking for capacity. The other markets, Kuwait, nowhere. We've done a lot of work in Kuwait with Citra. The government's just been dismantled, and that tends to happen every 5-7 years. So that's
every 20 weeks at the moment.
So that's nowhere. So you do have to be quite selective about what you can achieve in some of these markets. The activity is quite focused around those 2 or 3 that I mentioned.
Thank you. Don, if I come to you, yeah.
And so yeah, I completely agree with all of that. I also think there's sometimes a sort of a false sense of a halo effect where particularly hyperscalers will ask multiple companies to go and find them certain things, and they're asking for the same things, and we're all in a bit of a race to satisfy them because they want some diversity of operational supply in a market in case, whichever company, say Pure, has a significant issue. If we had all of the 3 elements that made their availability zone, then they'd be in a pickle, right? So they're seeking diversification. They're asking multiple actors to try and find them some of the capacity they want, and we're in a bit of a race to find it for them. So sometimes some of the market projections are overinflated because of this sort of halo effect where multiple actors are trying to find things in a region. I think there's also another element where sort of governments, particularly like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, are wanting to not only get the tech companies there, but also to get some of that capability internalized, so that certain companies are looking for partnerships with the likes of Pure, so that they can then empty our heads of how to build and operate a data center, so they can then go and sort of start their own deployments. So there's an element of that as well. So again, that might be sort of a false inflation where they're sort of encouraging extra footprints because they want to get some of this learning themselves.
And again, I just finish with you, Don. Pure is an established platform, and your interest there in the region now, how much is a push from your side, you want to go there, and how much is a pull from them inviting you, attracting you there?
So I think it's not about attracting Pure, it's about attracting the hyperscalers. So there's a push from us to be the actors in the region who can work with both the hyperscalers and work in joint ventures with particular companies in different regions. So it's a little bit of both, but the real intent is not so much to have Pure work with them, it's to have Pure work with them to help them work with the hyperscalers, so that then they could become the Saudi Arabian version of Pure, perhaps.
But I presume, on the other hand as well, that you're not going there and setting up alone, that you have a local partner there.
Absolutely.
That's what my question was about.
Yes.
How much is a local partner coming and
so multiple local partners would like to work with us. So it's choosing your partnerships is very key,
because we heard earlier, right, and I guess everybody who follows the GCC knows now that there is a repatriation of funds towards the GCC now, and we heard Henry, for example, talking about the family offices, etc., bringing in money back to GCC. So and they've been told to invest in digital infrastructure, and those people are the future partners of the opcos. Tim.
Yeah, so we've when we went into region, we very much partnered with primarily local either families or infrastructure funds that are using local funds, local expertise. Generally speaking, with absolutely no data center experience at all, and to the point about knowledge transfer, there's always a thirst for knowledge, but it's been what is underpinning the cloud environments that we've managed to put live there now at Quantum, and so I think we're just at the start, and there's a lot of noise. There's talks about gigawatts and so on, but I think it will be a steady growth as people get to understand what the asset class is and what does it mean within the region. I think it is different, and there is a lot of money to support it, but it's at the moment it needs to be more educated, and we're all going through those processes of educating what the infrastructure funds, the local infrastructure funds, and the future partnerships that we may have in those regions. So, but I think a lot of the countries in Qatar and Saudi are going to catch up to the UAE in not in short order, but in terms of capacity. But the UAE seems to be leading the pack at the moment.
Yeah. And that noise is valid. Not just it's everywhere, right? One has to filter through the noise. I mean, remember listening to Bruno Lopez this morning talking about the multiple gigawatts that have supposedly been committed by the utility in Malaysia. Milan, anything you want to add to this, or?
No, I think that's fine. I think we'll see. I think that some of the countries still haven't got to grips with the need to deregulate. You need to give away a little bit when it comes to your incumbent telecoms revenue in order to create this opportunity. And right now, I think that's going to be the biggest impediment in some of these countries. They're so fixated on some of these backhaul revenues they get. So a typical country sees subsea cables as a huge benefit to their income telco because they're going to milk it from backhaul revenue, right? From the CLS to the main kind of metros. A more forward-thinking government thinks, oh no, okay, this is a step change in my ability to service the international requirements of my businesses and my consumers. Therefore, I will facilitate very low-cost backhaul revenue and allow that to thrive. Very, very split, and I think the region is incredibly, polarized in that respect. Some get it, and some just don't.
I think, and we're certainly seeing that. Why Riyadh hasn't really taken off as a colo. The backhaul from Dammam or from Jeddah actually will cost more per year than a data center costs to build. And there's some silly numbers being thrown around. A 1 gig internet connection, is $100,000 a year in Saudi, whereas in London it's like a tenner. So there's some very.
So that's the job of the regulator.
It is,
and he's not.
I think there are challenges. I think there have been joint ventures and revenue shares that have been put in place that historically wouldn't have seen this amount of capacity being taken up. So they were looking at a different level, and I think that there does need to be a pivot. And going to your point about deregulation, I think there needs to be more options in the marketplaces than there currently are. And I think UAE is leading that a little bit. They're opening it up. They're allowing more fiber licenses, more telcos to come in, become both wholesale and retail carriers. So it's starting, and once one starts, there'll be a snowball effect across the region.
The perfect example of lost opportunity is Egypt, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Egypt should have been the greatest interconnection hub on the planet, and they're nowhere, right? You look at, and it's not like it's a closed loop. You look at Marseille, my favorite example. 2014, it was number 48 in the world. Internet hub rankings today, it's number 5, and they have 14 subsea cables, maybe another couple to come quite soon. Egypt had all of that, and they had an unassailable geographic stronghold, and yet they're nowhere because of the regulatory structures.
Well, yeah. If I want to be a little bit adding to this, Milan, this session is called GCC. It's not called Middle East for a good reason, is unfortunately because the rest of the Middle East is not in the best of shape. And Egypt is on life support and supported by the GCC, by the UAE and Saudi Arabia coffers. If we can pick up now on some of the themes that I addressed, and I start with you, Don, which is investments out, perhaps, of the GCC into anywhere. Is there anything you want to share with us?
So I think the opportunity is there. The demand profiles are through the roof, and notwithstanding what I said about the race and there being some duplication in sort of reporting of requirements. So I think whoever solves the power planning and getting to certainty to allow ease of deployment the swiftest will see the largest expansion in terms of AI and data center footprints. There are many regions that want it. There are regions that have frustrated themselves with power moratoriums like Dublin, Singapore, etc. So some of the agnostic workloads will be looking for homes, and cheap power and ease of regulation and planning and time to market will be the winners there.
Milan, GCC investments out. Let's focus on Africa, perhaps a region
sure.
you know very well.
Yes, I think sometimes a lot of the investments aren't big enough, right? So that's what we found, Damac, 3-4 megawatts doesn't move the needle for an owner of that business with $5 billion in the bank, right? So looking for 10, 20 megawatts to even make it relevant to the business, and that's not really available outside of 2 markets in Africa. So that's a challenge. So they're looking for large. G42 is no exception. And then you've got the power piece. In general, I think the biggest issue we have in all of these markets, Africa, Middle East, is that some of the lessons haven't been learnt. So you'll hear people throughout the day, this morning, there was comments, the 3 ingredients are power, land, and permits, right? Yeah, okay, that's kind of a recipe for disaster.
Connectivity, by the way.
Well, you and I talked about this, right? So that's a recipe for disaster in my view, because that's the fastest runway to commoditization. And, I spent a lot of time in African markets, and I think the reason that some of the existing operators are hitting, obstacles and are hitting brick walls is because they're built in free zones. Connectivity was a kind of secondary consideration. They built in a free zone 50 kilometers away. That doesn't appeal to Microsoft and Amazon and Google for their network nodes, edge pops. And so they're wondering why they're empty. And that's the reason. So I think this whole connectivity piece, which is, that's how the biggest campuses and the most valuable campuses in the world were created, around ecosystems and communities that revolved around connectivity. That lesson just has been forgotten. It's an art. It's almost a lost art. And perhaps as Telecity and Interaction got absorbed into other businesses and Telehouse got sucked into larger deals, maybe some of that got lost along the way. But I think that's something that needs to be really understood, that we're not there yet. And that creates an enormous gap.
But there is the opportunity, isn't there, for clever sort of investors and companies to go across the entire ecosystem to create the connectivity and build it. And so there are a few platforms that do that, Digital Bridges of this world, that have a piece of the pie in all of the bits of the ecosystem. So the opportunities are there.
Tim, last word is yours.
So we've been in the process of quite a big fundraise, and we're talking about investment out of the GCC into the rest of the world, and I would say that probably 60% of the engagements we have been GCC-based funds or family offices, so I think there is now a very definite, as you said, been pulling money back in to invest it both locally and to take into the opportunities of the digital infrastructure globally. We're seeing a lot of activity from a lot of the names that you started your presentation with around core investments. G42 obviously going into Kenya with Microsoft, etc. So that, there is definitely a push out, rather as well as a pull in, and owning those assets in region with local partners as well as expanding globally is you're going to see a lot more of that type of investments coming forward.
We're about to end, unless there's any, which I will be happy to take it, any burning question from anyone? No? Okay, well, I think we've reached out the end of time. Dame Dawn, Milan, Tim, thank you so much. Let's hear it.
Thank you.